Anyway, we have a very interesting session next on soft power. And to kick us off, we have the Special Secretary of the G20, Mr. Muktesh Pardeshi. Please give him a big round of applause.
Namaskar and very good afternoon. First of all, let me thank Indiaspora to invite me to share my thoughts on soft power, diplomacy, and cultural capital. Out of 36 work streams that we have under G20, there is none on diaspora matters. So I'm very happy that through this event we are taking up another subject matter in the rubric of G20 deliberations. Friends, in one of the recent speeches, Foreign Minister Dr. Jaishankar mentioned that the G20 gives an opportunity for India to be ready for the world and the world to be ready for India. And I think it is in this context that the role and significance of soft power and diaspora becomes very salient. We all know that during last 3 decades, the notion of soft power has come to be become popular. It is to be understood as the ability of states to influence and persuade other states and people to their preferences through its appeal of cultural heritage, the values, and the policies. When we talk about India's soft power, we have certain inherent strengths, and now our diplomats are very well aware, and in certain contexts they are utilized very effectively. When we talk about soft power and the cultural capital, the first item which comes to my mind is the essence of India's worldview. What would be the essence which will epitomize India's worldview? This question came up when we were discussing the theme of India's G20 presidency. So the core group, we were discussing different notions such as Shanti, Satya, Ahimsa, and then we stumbled over the concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. And here we thought this phrase symbolizes the inherent, the strength of India's civilizational, the heritage. One earth, one family, and one future. Through this phrase, you will see that there is a conscious attempt made to enhance the appeal and the footprint of the India's soft power. The other the concept on which we are dwelling upon is how India can be, the claim that India is the mother of democracy. In democratic discourse, somehow this aspect was ignored earlier. We all know about the contribution of ancient Greece, but the contribution of India in the evolution of the notion of democracy to symbolize people's participation in governance was somehow missed out. So you will see in many hoardings all over India, there is a very conscious effort made to make that claim that democracy evolved in India. And there are several now studies, historical studies, and these historical studies are proof of the fact that whether it was in the luxury, in the Lichvi in Bihar, or in Arthashastra also there is a mention of Ganatantra as mode of governance. In Rig Vedas there are references to Sabha, Samiti as deliberative forum. So time has come, and I think here the role of the diaspora is important to spread awareness about contribution of Indian civilization in birth and evolution of democracy as a form of the governance. And then of course, when we talk about soft power, there are different assets, like India has been the birthplace of many religions, our epics, of course arts and crafts and food, music, dance, textile, all these are the visible assets, and there is now greater awareness about these assets. One of the recent attempts by the government is also to popularize some of the themes coming from traditional knowledge, and you will see how yoga has got international attention after the whole idea of International Day of Yoga was accepted in 2014. Now the Ayurveda has become the popular, and there is again the conscious effort made by our Ministry of Ayush to popularize yoga as a mode of the well-being. But friends, when we talk about unleashing of India's soft power, I think there is another asset, and we have not thought of that so consciously, and that's the contribution of the diaspora. Many countries, when they have different manifestations of the soft power, different tools, we are uniquely blessed with a diaspora which is the active, which is successful, and which is spread all over the world. So today's deliberation is important, because in the promotion and projection of the soft power, diaspora can play an important role. I would say that the successful diaspora becomes an attribute of soft power itself. Friends, since I here representing G20 Secretariat, let me share some insights into how G20 meetings are curated for projection and promotion of India's soft power. One of the directives and one of the guidance which came in the beginning from the Honorable Prime Minister, and in the Secretariat we could understand that this is how we have to shape the agenda, and this is how the meetings have to be organized. I think the two central aspects of our G20 presidency has been to develop a global vision of G20 for all. So it's not a G20 for member countries, but a G20 where all countries, particularly the global south, gets a voice. And the second, which is, that's indirectly coming out through projection of all our meetings, the national aspiration to lead. That spirit is being inculcated from Delhi to remotest part of the country, that India is getting ready to lead. So one is the national aspiration for leadership and finding a place in the globe, and the secondly, to craft G20 itself as a forum to reflect and portray and voice concerns and interests of the global south. While we are doing the G20, when we started the last year, we focused on some of the shortcomings for which we are known. For example, we are not known as a great organizer country. We have not had big sports events like Olympics, or even in terms of diplomatic events, we had NAM and CHOGM, an India-Africa summit, but that was many years ago. And there the focus was more on the developing world, to have the most powerful country descending in Delhi for G20 meeting. That is happening for the first time. So through G20, we would like to show that India is ready in terms of the organizational skills. And one of the tasks which was given by the leadership, that by doing this, showcase to the world that our G20 presidency will be more expansive, this will be more elaborate, it will be uniquely Indian and impeccable. And friends, as we have completed almost 8-9 months of our G20 presidency, there is unqualified acceptance of the successful manner in which India has conducted itself so far. No country, even a country like China, had thought of organizing G20 meetings in more than 15 places. Indonesia ventured to do it in 25 places. You will be very most pleased to know that our plan is to have it in 60 places. 57 places have already done. We have done 200 meetings out of 230 so far. And in a fortnight from now, we'll have all the world leaders coming to Delhi for the G20 summit. When it was an impossible task last year when I was High Commissioner in New Zealand, when I was asked to come and take over as a Special Secretary to steer through logistics and operation. I had the experience of 2 places. I was ambassador in Mexico, and Cancun is known for hosting big meetings. Many years ago, I was also Deputy Chief of Mission in Indonesia, and Bali once again is an ideal location for hosting international conference. So I remember in the very first meeting when we were deliberating, I said, we are nowhere close to Cancun and Bali. But it's our desire to do well and the task which emanated from the leadership. Then we started looking at the places from north to south. The Prime Minister in one sentence said that no state and union territory will be left out. We have done that. So all 35 states and union territories are done. So through this, the whole idea was to showcase the world and entire breadth of India to the world. So we have had meetings from Jammu and Kashmir to Lakshadweep and Andaman and Nicobar, from west in Diu to Dimapur in the west. We have gone to places where not even a small international conference has ever taken place. In Diu, when we had G20 meetings, the people, particularly the taxi drivers, they said, "Thank you very much, sir. For the first time, Diu is on the international map." You just can imagine the sense of pride the street vendors, taxiwalas, shopkeepers, and the general populace have they have gained through the G20 meetings. So I think this has sent a good message, and this I would say this is a success story in terms of projection of India's the soft power. So G20 this year for diplomats, it's like Chandrayaan moment that we have. For the first time, and no country has taken diplomacy to the grassroots like this. No country. So it's a great achievement for the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs in the sense that the diplomacy has been democratized and socialized at the grassroots level. Through when we are doing meetings in remote places, there is focus on 3 C's, and that's important for understanding of the soft power: the culture, crafts, and cuisine. We are no more serving Mughlai food in Tamil Nadu. The delegates, they have to necessarily eat the local food. The product, there's a scheme called One District, One Product. For the gifting, for the first time, gifts are sourced from the local districts. So if the meeting is taking place in Kerala, it will not be sandstone items from the north which will be gifted to the visiting dignitaries. It will be the locally sourced stuff, largely from the women craftspeople. The food will be the local. The way the costume and the welcome is designed is the local. In fact, we are creating a video how welcomes are done in more than 50 manners in India. So our team we have produced for each small place the videos, and I'm sure if you want to see any video on your the city from where you come from, you should look for the G20, the videos. Friends, through G20, we would like to leave a lasting legacy in terms of portrayal, in terms of projection of the India's civilizational strength and the soft power. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Pradeshi. Please give him another round of applause. Okay, we're going to have a conversation now. My name is Victor Thomas, President and CEO of the Canada-India Business Council. And as I think about this moment in time, it really is historic. We're here on the 24th of August, on the eve of the B20. We of course know the G20 is coming next month. But you know, some people used to say the adage, the sky's the limit. And now the sky's no longer the limit. The moon's not even the limit. So really, when you think of what is possible in this country and in the world, it is pretty amazing. And we were here doing this momentous and historic time. I would also just say, you know, when you think of the diaspora, if you had a snow globe and you actually shook up the world, you literally have Indians everywhere. And of course, we have 26 Indians, Indians representing different countries here at this event. But it is amazing to think, you know, where all India is and the impacts they've had. And today we'll get into a little bit of the soft power pieces of it. Joseph Nye is the instigator in the late 1980s on the idea of soft power. And he really, at that time, focused it around three different things, but it's expanded, as Ambassador talked about earlier. And he was really talking about values, policy, and culture. And it's amazing now to see how it's evolved, and we'll get into it. I have 4 amazing panelists. All of them wear so many different hats. I could sit here and read their bios for at least 45 minutes, but we'll start with Ambassador Vikas Swarup, of course, former secretary, former ambassador, and high commissioner specifically to Canada. I'll mention that. And of course, author of Slumdog Millionaire, amongst many, many other accolades and positions. But Ambassador, over to you.
Thank you, Victor. I think it's very good that Indiaspora is focusing on India's soft power as part of this panel because, as Ambassador Pradeshi very eloquently pointed out, India is a country which always had soft power. The only difference is, in the past, that soft power was largely associated with metaphysics. Yoga, Ayurveda, our philosophical traditions, etc. But increasingly now, it is associated with physics, as we saw last evening at 6 o'clock when the Vikram lander became the 4th spacecraft, in terms of the number of countries who have sent spacecrafts to the moon to land there. And I think that is really this new piece of the puzzle that the world is increasingly relating to. They do recognize India's strengths in yoga and Ayurveda and mystical beliefs and religion and spirituality. But increasingly, the new India that the world is gravitating to is the India of ICT, telecom, startups, space, science, technology, mobile phones. And I think that is the India that also the new Indian diaspora also represents. I don't know if all of you are aware that now we have 32 million people of Indian origin or Indian citizens living outside India. That includes non-resident Indians as well as people of Indian origin. 32 million, it's the largest diaspora in the world.
Almost all of Canada.
Exactly, almost. Canada is what, 37 million, 38 million? 40 now, you're 40 now, yeah. So we are 32 million just spread all over the country, all over the world. And as somebody has said, there are two things you can find in every corner of the world: potatoes and Indians. But I was struck by what Ambassador Pardeshi said, that increasingly now the Indian diaspora is seen as one of the biggest assets of Indian soft power. And the reason for that is very simple. You know, the diaspora evolved over three different stages. The first stage was in the 1890s, when the so-called the coolie laborers were sent out to the colonies by Britain and even by France to work in the sugar plantations. That was the first phase. And they were followed by some traders who said, okay, Indian population is going, so maybe we can service them as well. And that's how you had the Dukawalas of East Africa and the Chettiars of Singapore, etc., arriving there. The second phase started with the oil boom of 1973, the oil shock rather, when Indian workers started migrating to the Gulf to service the oil industry. And the third phase really began in the late 60s, when qualified Indians, studying in Indian technical institutions started migrating to the West for better opportunities. Because remember, at that time, India was a very closed economy. It had the license permit Raj. Our creative energies were shackled, literally. And the only outlet that many Indians, educated Indians, felt that they could exercise was by migrating to the West. And that was a time I grew up in India when people who were leaving India were seen as traitors. The pejorative word for NRIs was non-required Indian, not required Indians. That is what we used to call them, that these are people who have betrayed the motherland, they have gone to greener pastures, they have completely left behind their Indian identity, so to speak. But that was not the case because, as they say, you can take an India out of India, but you cannot take India out of an Indian. So these Indians who left the shores of India actually retained their Indian identity, their Indian cultural traditions. The biggest example is South Africa, where because of apartheid, they were completely cut off from India. And in fact, if they did anything against the regime, the standard response was, we'll send you back to India and you can never come back to South Africa. And of course, they didn't want to leave their adopted homeland. But they kept the culture of India alive, even though they were physically separated by thousands of kilometers. There was no access at that time. There was no cable TV and Netflix and things like that. But they kept the culture of India alive. So this is the first thing, the cultural capital that we talk about. The diaspora possesses a lot of cultural capital. And it is this cultural capital which has kept that emotional bond alive. But increasingly now, as I said, it is now the economic capital, the financial capital, and the technological capital of the diaspora that we are interested in. And that is really what is accounting for this new image of India. Look at the number of Fortune 500 companies which have taken Indian origin CEOs. I mean, you yourself, Victor, you're a Canadian, but you're heading the Canada-India Business Council. And that's it. And I think Indiaspora itself is a prime example. It's a global network of Indians, who want to now contribute back to society. So I think it is this new image of India which is being spurred by the success and the increasingly, high profile of the diaspora. I mean, yesterday there was a debate in America on the Republican side, and two of the presidential hopefuls were Vivek Ramaswamy and Nikki Randhawa Haley. And then you have Rishi Sunak, who's now the Prime Minister of Britain, and you have Antonio Costa, who's the Prime Minister of Portugal, and you have Leo Varadkar, who's the Prime Minister of Ireland. And of course, Mauritius and Suriname, I'm not even adding, because there you have had a history of people of Indian origin heading these top posts. So I think it is this new, the diaspora, which is contributing and adding to India's soft power. And I think I'll stop.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Swaroop. Next, we have Anat Bernstein-Reich, who is an investment banker by day. It's one of the hats, but also is the president of the Israel-Asia Chamber of Commerce. Please share your thoughts.
Thank you, Victor. You would say what an Israeli is doing here in this Indiaspora conference, and I always say that my soul is Indian. And my soul is Indian, but in this lifetime I'm Israeli and a Jew. But I feel so much at home in India and with Indian that I feel so comfortable talking today and being in India in general. When we're talking about diaspora, the Jews have diaspora all over the world. And you are an author, but you're also a mentalist. Because if you take the notes that I prepared for today, and I read it to you, it's exactly what you said. So you're also a mentalist. And when you spoke about the non-required or non-reliable Indians, the NRIs, the same applied in Israel. The late Prime Minister Rabin called the Israelis that migrated mainly to the US also the non-reliable Israelis. So we share the NRIs as well. And over the 25 years, I'm commuting between India and Israel, and I'm part of two very strong networks that actually the origin is India. And the network was created because of the Indian diaspora. And I'll give you one example, which is the Thai, the Indus entrepreneurs that actually started in the Silicon Valley in '92 with very successful IT entrepreneurs. And they started this network over there to support entrepreneurship. And today, Thai organization is a global network of entrepreneurs, actually the largest. I see a few members here, Suril and Sanjay and Dinesh was here. I see also Chris here. And it's built on the Indian diaspora in the 60 countries or 60 chapters that this network starts. And the Indian starts it, and then he adds more people to this network, and today we have 15,000 members, okay? Thanks to Indian NRIs that started it in the Silicon Valley. Another example is actually a network of women that started here in Delhi by Dr. Harbin Arora, which is called the Women Economic Forum, following the WEF, but it's a Women Economic Forum. And again, Dr. Arora built it initially on Indian ladies in the diaspora. And today, this network covers 100 countries. They already conducted over 95 conferences. And it's amazing what this kind of network is doing, and the origin is Indian. So the soft power of having Indians scattered all over the world is actually allowing the networks to reach more people all over the world. Is it you, Seema? Yes. Hi. So she's part of our Thai organization. I was just mentioning Thai, so welcome. Thank you. That's the best one. Why not? In Israel, we have an Indian diaspora. Jews that lived in India and migrated after our independence back to Israel. And this is actually a double diaspora. Think about it. Because during King Solomon, the Jews migrated to India. They became Indian Jew. After our independence, they migrated to Israel. But they've been here many, many years. I mean, I would say thousands of years. So here they were the diaspora of the Jews. Now in Israel, they are the diaspora of India. So they are double diaspora. And what I find in Israel recently very interesting is that till now we had very few very famous Indians in Israel, like Zubin Mehta, the conductor, or Rina Pushkarna, the restaurateur. And I see now more young people recognizing their Indian roots and wanting to connect to India. And I think it's that because India rises, so suddenly they are proud of being from Indian origin. So as India grows, and yesterday I could see it clearly we have a WhatsApp group of the Indian diaspora or Indian Jews in Israel, and I'm part of this group, and suddenly everybody greet each other on the success of India, okay? So I think that India becoming such a power also gives those people a point to rise and connect to their roots, and I see more will happen with the Indian diaspora in Israel, and this is thanks to India. So those are my opening remarks. One last thing, and we spoke about culture, and this is a point of resume that it's not written in whatever you got. It was almost 20 years back. I was part of a production, a Bollywood production called The Bharti Show. And The Bharti was a stage spectacle that we produced Israelis here in India. And we took a Bollywood show to the world. It ran for 13 years all over the world. And it was amazing to see that, of course, we had Indian audience, Indian and Pakistani and South Asia audience coming to watch it. And it was only in Europe, US, and Africa, not in India. And the pride that we saw with the Indian audience coming, and you could see while watching the show how they connect and how they were proud to the other audience, which were Germans or French or wherever we've been. I'm an Indian, okay? So it was really touching, and they really connected to their roots. And when our show, it ran for 13 years in the world, and many Bollywood classes started after that. It created a trend. People wanted to study Bollywood lessons. So you'll see a lot of Bollywood. I see in France, in Germany, in the UK, of course, it makes sense. And it gives me a lot of happiness that actually people are able to connect to their roots also through dance and culture. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Next we have Bala, who's come all the way from Iceland and is the founder of Startup Iceland.
Okay. I'm happy to represent Iceland. I think all the diaspora contribution around the world is very obvious, and Iceland is one of the maybe the newer countries where Indian diaspora is making a very strong and soft power, if you will. For those of you who don't know, the population of Iceland is 350,000-ish, give or take. And I knew about Iceland when I was doing my graduate study because my wife is Icelandic, and I met her in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And I had no idea that we will be living in Iceland, or whatever that I'm doing now, I will be doing. I followed the typical Indian, non-required Indian model, which is go to the US and do your graduate study and work in, a Fortune 500 company. And my wife kind of changed a lot of that once we had our first daughter. So we started living in Iceland, and I can tell you the first time I went to Iceland in the year 2000, people would literally stop and stare when I would walk on the streets, because I was probably the first Indian there. Or maybe not.
Did they think you're a Bollywood actor?
Well, as I said, I'll take that compliment. But they probably were just looking at me thinking, who is this guy? What is he doing here? Because Iceland is a very homogeneous country. And for those of you who've been there, it's a beautiful place. And for those of you who have not been there, I highly recommend you go there, because Iceland is one of those bucket lists that you have to have, because nature, as how God created, is seen in Iceland. I've never seen anything like that when I first went there. And this was the words that my dad and mom also said when they first came to Iceland. Coming back to the soft power and then why I'm here, Emma actually met me almost 7-8 years back in Iceland when he was vacationing there. And MR, being the connector that he is, learned somehow about an Indian actually doing something in Iceland of meaning. And he said, I should meet this guy. And we met him and we spoke about what I'd been working on. And I can say that I had no ambition of doing whatever that I happened to do there. I just saw that something was missing in the community that I was part of. I decided to do something about it. And I think that's what real soft power is. You see the communities you live in, and you see that something is not working, and you take it upon yourself to go fix it. And when you start fixing it, suddenly people start looking at you and say, oh, you should do more of this, you should do more of that. And that's how my career kind of took off. I had no ambition to do whatever that I did in the last decade or so, but it's what I would recommend you all do as well, because you're all leaders here, and I think Niren in the previous talk hit upon all the things that I think we all should be doing in our own communities, which is if you see something that is not working, take it upon yourself to go fix it, because nobody else is going to do it. And what else I can say? So the startup community is what I'd been passionate about building in Iceland, because I actually moved to Iceland and I started working for an Icelandic bank. I was appointed as the head of that bank, and I moved to Mumbai to actually start our Indian branch. And this was August 2008, and for those of you who can think back, October 2008 was the financial crisis, and I only jokingly say I'm probably the only person in the world to have started and stopped a bank in 3 months. I don't think that has ever happened. I'm probably the only one to have done that. And when I moved back to Iceland, the entire international banking staff were fired, and I was 35. Before that event happened, I was having dinner with the then finance minister of India, Mr. Chidambaram, and the finance minister of Iceland, discussing how we were going to do things in India and Iceland relationship. And a little bit of a tidbit, when Chidambaram was the finance minister of Iceland, of India, he visited Iceland. And he learned about the fact that everybody knew everybody in Iceland, and he actually asked the finance minister of Iceland to look up a kid who came to India when Chidambaram was a kid, and he was from Iceland. They came for some fisheries advisory. Somebody from Iceland come to India, and they actually found that person. He was a dentist, and in the next 10 minutes, he was called, and they were actually having a conversation. So that's Iceland. It's a small village. Everybody knows everybody. And in that place, trying to find a job after you're fired from an executive role was almost impossible. I couldn't imagine what was happening because I was very depressed at that time. I've never been fired in my life. If somebody gave me a broom, I would be the best broom person in the room. That's how the values that was built into me. And I saw that this was kind of strange in a small village, that somebody with talent coming in and people didn't want to really hire you. And that's what led me to look around and say, okay, what nobody else was doing, I will just do that, and that'll be my job. It became the mission, and all the things that I've done is pretty much aligned with that. And when this journey started, nobody was even using the word entrepreneur or startups in Iceland. Literally, nobody was even using that word. And today, Iceland is a vibrant ecosystem, and actually, talent from India has allowed Iceland to build a brand new industry that didn't exist before in biotechnology. This company is called Alvotech, and if you, it's listed in NASDAQ, you can look it up. The entire manufacturing of biosimilar process was built by one of my senior from BITS Pilani. He moved to Iceland, built this whole thing, set up the entire infrastructure. Now there are 400 Indians working for Alvotech in Iceland. So To the point of soft power and all that, I think the pivot has already happened. The world is looking for talent to be acquired from India to go and build in other places. So I think we don't have to do much in that regard. I think all the leadership that we see in the Fortune 500 companies has more or less painted the view that the values that come from India is naturally towards leadership. We do what's right in the community. We actually take part. We actually contribute. We show up. We do all the things that most communities are looking for. So we don't have to really aspire to do anything more, but I think we should actually do that for those who are not doing. I think there's plenty of us could be doing many things. And that would be my kind of small conclusion to my introduction. We can do more. We should do more. And the world wants it, and I aspire very much to the saying, we are one family, we are one world, and there's only one future. There is no multi-futures, If we kill ourselves, then it doesn't matter where we live.
Thank you, Bala. Next, we have Dea Thisu, Professor of International Communication at Hong Kong Baptist University. Please.
Thank you. Thank you, the organizers, for inviting me to be in this August gathering. I have been part of the diaspora for a long time, non-required Indian, and sort of similar story of Bala's, but I was in London, so it wasn't as much of a surprise. I'm married to an English woman who's mother of my 2 children, and I did my PhD from a university here in Delhi, in South Delhi, which gets very bad name recently. It was a fantastic place to study. I went to UK on a postdoc. And I studied, because I was an international relations student, I was getting into communication part of it. And then I got a job in London, and I was teaching at the University of Westminster for many years. I was a professor there, which has a very big media school. And I set up an India Media Center there. But I was also a research advisor for a China Media Center, which was also the first of its kind in Europe. And we launched a big event. We organized a conference on India's soft power, which was done in consultation with the Ministry of External Affairs. In those days, we used to have a public diplomacy division within the ministry, which I don't think exists anymore.
Yes, it's been merged back with the external publicity.
With visas and things. But anyway, there was a dedicated stuff, that's gone now. And with CII, and it was a fantastic event. While I was organizing that, I was looking for material on India's soft power, academic material. The ambassador spoke about how wonderful our soft power is, how old it is, how sophisticated it is. And of course, we know about the contemporary stuff. We saw it in all its glory yesterday evening. And I found there was hardly anything of any substance written on this topic. There was a piece by a German scholar, and there was some Chinese guy who was a researcher in Australia who had written a piece. And Mr. Shashi Tharoor, who has been talking about it for as long as I remember, had written a short piece in a journal in, here in Delhi. And that was it. So I did some, I thought, this part of my kind of vocation, I should do something on this. And I wrote a book which was published 2013, actually, it's 10 years now. And I called it Communicating India's Soft Power, Buddha to Bollywood. Because I have a history background, I thought it was very important to go back into history and challenge the kind of American version of what soft power is, which has a very geopolitical connotation. The phrase appears at a certain time in history, end of the Cold War. And as we all know, America is actually a very hard power, both in economic terms and certainly in military terms. Of course, it also has substantial soft power. But the soft power is basically supported by very, very strong, economic and political power. And I had a chapter in it, I called it the digital dividend, the diasporic dividend. And listening to the presentations here last 2 to 3 days, I'm sort of, it is about dividends. It sounds very corporate, but actually the role of diaspora, particularly the US-based diaspora, has been phenomenal in terms of how India is perceived. You go to any Ivy League university, you will find an Indian professor there, and she will be top of her game. Similarly in corporate world, and increasingly in politics. In the UK, the heart of imperial history, the Prime Minister is a Hindu. The chap who is head in Scotland has Muslim background. And the Prime Minister of Ireland is originally from Goa. So if there was a case of empire striking back, here you have it in all its glory. I want to just end with one reflection, which perhaps we'll have time to talk more about, but I just wanted to put that out in the discussion because as a communication professor, I find that our soft power is not really communicated as effectively as it ought to be. We are a country with the largest, not just largest diaspora, but largest English-speaking diaspora. We have a tradition of very professional journalism, which has now been debased for various reasons, a different forum, not this one for that. But there is an English language professional journalistic culture in this country. There is a largest global diasporic population, English-speaking population, some of them as in this room, leaders in their field. But our voice is absent in the global media space. When the Chinese and the Iranians and the Turks and the Russians and the Germans, I could go on, have their presence. The non-speaking speaking countries and also not particularly known for democratic cultures. So something is missing. And Mr. Swaroop is here, Ms. Pardesi is here. I don't know why this has not been given the importance it deserves, because in this age of 24/7 connectivity, communication is fundamental. And I think there's something perhaps needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dea. MR actually just walked in the room, and Bala mentioned that MR is a connector. And I think that's actually understating what he actually does. You know, some people have a radar. He has a INDIAR. And so anywhere he goes, literally around the world, he seems to find the diaspora and is connecting and is bringing them together. So I just wanted to take a moment on that to thank him, Sanjeev, and Shri for putting on this great gathering. But this also coincides, and all of you have alluded to it, with the rise of India, right? That those that are here, those that are outside, are all of a sudden going back and saying, hey, I see people that look like me in positions of power, in business, and in politics, and the country is rising. So how do you actually see this playing out in terms of soft power from your different vantage points?
Maybe I can. The finance minister of Iceland was in our. I think it was one of the Indian events that the ambassador had organized in Reykjavik. The finance minister's first statement was that, you know, Indians are running all the companies. I don't know why we don't have more Indians in Iceland. So I think the message is already out. I think the next challenge for us is to kind of, you know, get the message out there that we are great organizers. We can land things on moon. We build great software. We actually make great things. So why shouldn't you get this talent into wherever you are, whether it is the Caribbean islands or Iceland or Ireland or wherever, to get smart people to come and work on these things. When I first moved to Iceland and I was talking about startups and whatnot, the Icelanders would ask us, but we don't have that many people here. We don't have that much talent here. My point is, if you do worthwhile things, smart people want to go there and do the same. You know, Silicon Valley is one example of that. And I think every place in the world could do the things that would attract talented people. And I think the diaspora has a role to play there. And I also have, you know, we are 1.4 billion people. So just by law of numbers, I'm sure there's more talented people here than, you know, the rest of the place. So we should be trying to get them to move freely. So that's why when in one of the comments talking about immigration and visa and some of these bureaucratic challenges that talented people face, we need to kind of cut those cords and keep it open so people can go and migrate and work wherever they want to work. We have unprecedented challenges facing us. Climate change is not something that happened in the past or is going to happen in the future. It's already happened. Climate has changed. It's not changing, it has changed. So we need to kind of adapt and build new things to resolve and make sure that we can thrive in the future. Let's dream about those things, right? So those challenges cannot be addressed the same way that we've been thinking about in the past. We need to cut the cords and make these dreams possible for everybody, all the kids, anywhere in the world, to work on. So I think the soft power, you know, is a kind of loaded word. We can look at it negatively, we can look at it positively. I tend to look at it positively. I think if you do the right thing, it doesn't matter where you're from, how you look. All those things shouldn't matter. What matters is it something that's going to benefit humanity, the one family, the one earth? If we can aspire to get to that point, I think the soft power will automatically come. It doesn't matter where we are.
I just wanted to mention one point which is relating to Israel. And if you know, a few years back, we signed the Abraham Accord, which is diplomatic relations with UAE and later with Bahrain. And a Quad was formed, which is called I2U2. Israel, India, US, UAE. And this term was coined when Dr. Jaishankar came to Israel 2 years back or a bit earlier. And this I2U2, what is this creature? It's a creature that creates all those countries work together, but it's more than that. In a sense that for Israelis to work with UAE, it was a new thing. I mean, for us, the Arab world was the enemy, you know. We have peace with Egypt and Jordan, but we couldn't go to UAE, we couldn't trade with them. And when Abraham Accord were signed, suddenly people came to me and told me, there are a lot of Indians in UAE. Maybe you can help us connect, because through the Indians. And that's what happened. CII brought a delegation of Indians and people from UAE to Israel to do business. There are now conferences of I2U2 where the US is a lot of American Jews, UAE is Indians and some local Emirates, and Israelis, and Indians, of course. So through the Indians, wherever you are, wherever they are, you can reach also to the local communities, and of course the I2U2 is an example that I wanted to share with you from my world.
I will just say, Victor, that the relationship between the diaspora and the mother country is mutually reinforcing. The more the diaspora succeeds in politics, in business, in culture, in academia, I think the more pride Indians take in the fact that that increases our soft power, so to speak. And the more the diaspora sees a confident, mature India on the world stage, you know, which is quoted by the world, now we are the president of the G20, things like that. I think that adds to the value of the diaspora because, you know, there was a time 20 years ago, many people in the diaspora would not identify themselves as Indian. They would, in fact, in South Africa, I experienced this firsthand. If you say, oh, you are Indian, no, I'm South African. That's what they would say. But increasingly now, because they see a very confident India on the world stage, and India which is doing very well, economically which is doing very well, I think there is pride in taking ownership of the fact that you are a person of Indian origin.
As Ambassador Swaroop said earlier, there are different phases of these migration. I was the later version, so I've been living outside India since 1988. I still have Indian passport, to the chagrin of my wife and my children. My son is a diplomat, British diplomat, and he can't get a posting in Delhi because his father is Indian. So he's very cross with me. So, I mean, I know Zubin Mehta has Indian passport and Amrita Sen. I'm not in the same category. But there are people who would say it's not just, it's not just a piece of paper. There's something more associated with it. I would just want to say a little kind of side episode which might be illuminating about this point. In one of the small towns outside London where I lived for many years, there was a little corner shop, a chemist, Mr. Daji. So I used to go there because my mother was living with me and I needed to go to the chemist regularly. And I would always speak to him in English. He would speak back in English. And then one day I saw his wife in very colorful Punjabi dress, speaking in chaste Punjabi. So I asked him, you kept the language. And how long have you been here? He said, 20 years. But before that, we were in Kenya for it's the third generation. And he's never been to India. So I said, how do you keep this? He said, yeah, it's in the heart. And there was such a touching, I don't know his nationality, he probably is, but that, never been to Punjab, never been to India, but that's so deep. So I think that connect it's not just what official, functions do or discuss or what people write about it. It is very deep. And I would just say perhaps another level, that India is not a country, it's a civilization. So that civilizational ethos, why do we have to copy what Joseph Nye says about soft power? It's a very American definition of what is culture, what is power. We have much more to draw from, a far more sophisticated tradition in medicine, in intellectual history. And I get very excited about what is being discussed, but then when I look at the outcome, there's not very much, right? And having been, stationed in Sinosphere now for a few years, I can see how little they know about us. It is frightening. And again, our soft power is so obsessively looking at what the Americans tell us or write about us that we forget a large part of the globe. And I think communication, again, is a fundamental issue. How do you we talk about Global South, but is any Indian newspaper has any kind of representative in South Africa, for example, or no? So I think there is a whole kind of debate that needs to be kind of, in the open to say, how do we strengthen this connection, not just with diaspora, beyond that. Thank you.
Well, we'll open it up in a minute for questions. One thing expanding the definition of Joseph Nye, and I guess you could also, actually, I think back to a story in October. I was in Toronto and I had an Indian executive, and we were in the lounge, and a star athlete was nearby, and he's not normally there, and I happened to know him, so I said, I'm going to go say hi. I'd like you to come with me and I'll introduce you. And he's like, no, I don't care. He said, what sport? I said, ice hockey. He's like, and in Canada it's a big deal, but he didn't care. So I went and said hi. We caught up a little bit, and then I came back, and I was trying to think, how do I relate to him who this actually is? And I said, this is the Sachin Tendulkar of hockey. All of a sudden he said, why don't you introduce me? and his name was Wayne Gretzky. I don't know if you've heard of him, but it just shows that all of a sudden with sport, you can go beyond and make a connection where sometimes people have no interest. And when you think of culture, cricket plays a foundational part of this culture. You play it, sir, and I think Bal is...
Who doesn't in
No, but I think this is the piece where when you talk about soft power, it's an interesting play. I'd just love to get your take on it. And I know Bala is actually looking to do some stuff in Iceland on cricket. So.
Yeah, I think the fact that, I mean, one problem with cricket, it's only 10 test playing countries, you know, so it's not as global as or universal as football is, for instance. But the fact that, you know, it's a connector. The first conversation whenever the Prime Minister of Australia comes to India is about cricket. You know, it even brought India and Pakistan together in one famous match, for that matter. But I think more than that, now the business of cricket, you know, with the IPL franchise and now the franchises now springing up all over. Now, we just had a T20 in Canada now, a league has started. So I think that is, you know, the economic globalization of cricket. I think that is the exciting thing, that how cricket is now bringing in big bucks for all the countries in the world which themselves may not play cricket, but which have sizable Indian diasporas or South Asian diasporas which are interested in cricket. And I think that is something that Indiaspora could maybe focus on in the next edition.
I cannot stop talking about cricket. I am the chair of the Iceland Cricket Association, and if you're not following us on Twitter, you should. Iceland Cricket is the most followed amateur cricket club in the world, by the way. We have 96,000 followers. And I think there was one other diaspora member who said that he was able to get his daughter to play cricket because she realized that Iceland was playing cricket. So the reason I started doing this is because, one, cricket was a connector in Iceland for not just the diaspora, but it's also for the refugees. There are lots of refugees from Afghanistan and lots of other places in the world, Commonwealth countries. They could not relate to Iceland. Not just cold. Not just temperate. Everything, culture, everything. The Icelandic country actually is very advanced in the human rights. So if somebody comes in as a refugee, they give them a home, they give them an allowance, they give them a sports funding, they give them a bus pass. They want you to not be isolated, but they could not connect with anything. So cricket gave them a channel to connect with those of us who've been living there and them as refugees. Some of those refugees have gone on to become citizens in Iceland. They've built businesses, they've built families in the last decade. And it has been one of those interesting things that I noticed. And I thought this could be such a big connector. And that's why I kind of got engaged. And now we have over 130 players. We have 5 clubs. We conduct 4 tournaments. And we got Alvotech, which has been importing a lot of Indians to kind of become one of the sponsors for one of the clubs. So I think it can be a lot more. Sports can be a lot more because it kind of cuts through all the other things. So it is one of those other strong soft powers, I believe, can bring people together. I think that's what it's about.
Wonderful. I saw a couple hands up. I see one here, and one over there. We'll get this in the front, this lady. There's a microphone coming.
Thank you. My name is Seema Chaturvedi. Thanks for the shout out.
We all know you, Seema, now.
Okay. I know, all because of Anat. Talk about soft power, right? Women power right there. Such a thrill to listen to this. As a parent, I have to say this. And Anat, I have been very impressed because my children who have Jewish friends have always bragged about the birthright travel to Israel. And they come back that much more impressed with their own, I guess, belonging to an old culture. You know, Indiaspora, I know, has done something to this effect in the past, but beyond this current generation, and I'm very happy that we are all here, but and Indiaspora is again leading with Indiaspora Next, but can we not have something, as India gains more economic prominence and our kids look at opportunities here, why are we not talking about a birthright travel to India? It's one thing to come with parents and only hop from one grandparent home to another grandparent home, but it's quite another to come as a cohort of young soon to enter workforce and be impressed with the opportunities that India presents. And, Anat, I think, what you all have done is phenomenal in being that anchor for your diaspora globally. And it's just a matter of birthright. And I love the fact that you call it your birthright travel. I would encourage Indiaspora to double down and double click on this opportunity to enhance and permeate this soft power in the next generation as well.
I'm sure that the foreign ministry, but there is for India, I'm Indian, I told you, there is for India a birthright program. Yeah.
Correct.
No
It's
India.
the No India program, under which diaspora children who have never been to India can apply, and the government subsidizes this to a very large extent, I think to almost 85%. And it's a tailored package where we bring you to India, we take you to places of tourist interest, of scientific interest, of technological interest, and basically sometimes even the Prime Minister interacts with this bunch of people that come. Yeah, so this is it's called No India program, KIP. Yeah, and it's an online process, anyone can apply.
There you go. A question here and then a question over here.
My name is Aditya Jha. I'm from Canada, and my question is directed to either one of you, Mr. Pradesi or Mr. Vikas Swarup. When I hear of soft power, I have a mixed feeling. Soft, is it like soft that you can be hit very hard, very easily, or soft means that you are soft, you don't hurt others. And I think if we go back to the post-independence for many, many decades, I think we felt good about soft, but we were always hurt. So I wanted you to comment that as much, I like the way Mr. Muktesh ji mentioned the things about the historical perspective, cultural of soft power. But I'm really conflicted. I feel sometimes very hurt about that.
No, but you see, that's the dichotomy between soft power and hard power. Hard power works through coercion. Soft power works through influence. That, the fact that American soft power is because of McDonald's and MTV and, and Silicon Valley and things like that, which seep into your consciousness even without you knowing it. And I think that is, and that makes you more attuned towards, if you ask an Indian, which country would you like to migrate to? 90% would say America. Why? Because of the soft power. It's not the hard power, the TSA agents sniffing at you and, turning you back, but it's the soft power which makes that country attractive to you. And I think that is what soft power in its real essence is. It makes that country attractive to you through the value of its, of its ideals, of its culture, and of its beliefs. And I think that is where India, I think, has always been seen as the fact that we have never attacked any country. We have never been an aggressor, which Prime Minister has very clearly articulated in all of his speeches and statements. I think makes India a very attractive country. You would rather live in a country which is a non-aggressor than in a country which is constantly attacking other countries and creating disturbances and having a violent blowback.
Hi, Sureel Desai. When I think of soft power, I think of it like a sponge. It absorbs everything and yet retains its form. And we've absorbed a lot of refugees. We've absorbed an entire nation called Tibet. We've absorbed refugees from Afghanistan, from Iran, and the whole world. Those are the political refugees we've absorbed. But now we are entering an age where we're going to have climate refugees. And that's going to create a whole new challenge for the country, because, we just had the massive flooding in Pakistan, and now, politically you can have differences, but climate-wise you really can't have any distinguishing characteristic to it. It's a common factor. So how do you think India should India take a lead in this idea of climate refugees?
Interesting concept, but look, we are all in this boat together. I mean, it's not as if that you can escape climate change in one country and, face it in another. All of us, as he rightly said, the climate change has already happened. In America, they are still debating whether it's a hoax or not, but actually climate change has happened. Look at the frequency with which wildfires are happening, typhoons are happening, storms are happening, which used to happen once in 5 years are happening once every 5 months. So I think climate change is real, and I think no country is immune to it. We also saw this during the COVID pandemic. If any country thought that they could, just by closing their borders, they could control that virus, it turned out to be completely non-existent. Even New Zealand, which had completely ring-fenced, had cases. North Korea, in fact, did the best thing. They just started killing people who had the virus, and they thought they could control it. So my sense is that climate refugee, we will all be climate refugees in some sense or the other, and that's why this moon shot and Mars shot and things like that, we are already, science fiction and Netflix have already caught up with it, where people are exploring other worlds. So unless we wake up and we do something really real about climate change, this 1.5, I think, is already gone. Whether we can even restrict it to 2, I think that is the big question. And for me, that is the single biggest crisis facing humanity.
Thank you for a very important question, actually. If you think about it more carefully, it's really about sustainability. The whole model, which is globalized, and we all accept it without much discussion, is not sustainable. So I often tell my students, if everybody in India and everybody in China was driving their own cars, how many more Iraqs we'll have to invent and invade? Because there are finite resources. So then the question is, it's a civilizational issue. Then you think, well, how do you live? The whole idea of well-being, which is fundamental to Indian tradition. And why are we not able to tell it to people who are listening now because of what's happening to our environment? So I think it's an opportune moment for India to take that lead. There's a lot of rhetoric that you hear almost on a regular basis, but in actual terms, in terms of research, scholarship, citations, there's nothing. So that's where you need to focus. That's the soft power. So why do we go to America? Because the universities produce extraordinary research, right? Why do we read the New York Times? Because articles are properly researched. You may not agree with them. I don't. But they're properly researched. We don't have a newspaper comparable in this country. Despite having, Times of India was set up in 1838. So there are 10 generations of people who have worked in English language. But so that's the question. How do we promote a version which is distinctive? We have the capacity, we have the history, we have the intellectual tradition to articulate it. Thank you.
I think this is a fabulous conversation. We are out of time. I want to thank Dea, Bala, Anat, Ambassador, and as well as Ambassador for providing this perspectives. There will be a round for lunch. Please catch up with them. Those that have questions, and please give them a huge round of applause.